And wow. Oh, I see it.
Erin, I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Okay, not a problem.
Great.
So small.
That one.
Hi, John.
Hey, Jack, how are you?
Good. Good.
Well, I believe, scrolling through to see who's logged in, that we have a quorum. So I will call the meeting to order. This is I assume we're recording, Aaron?
Yes, we
Okay.
are.
All right. Well, I welcome everyone to a regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Albany's Historic Resources Commission. We certainly welcome participants from the public and those who are viewing this on a live stream on Facebook. We will have opportunities for people to make comments. we just request that comments be held to the matter at hand and also be held in duration of 3 minutes in the interest of time and everyone having an opportunity to make a comment. In attendance this evening, myself, John Myers, the chair, Commissioner McEnany, Commissioner Kaplan, Commissioner Hacker, Commissioner Tobin, Martha Mahoney from the legal office is representing the commission. And we have Aaron Glennon representing the planning office and as staff to the Historic Resources Commission. We have a combined public hearing agenda as well as a public workshop. So we will begin with the public hearing portion of the agenda. If we're ready to proceed, the first case on the agenda is 367 State Street in the Center Square Hudson Park Historic District. And it's concerning a window replacement on that structure. Windows to be replaced. Some have been replaced and others are slated to be replaced on that structure.
John, can you give me 1 second?
Oh, sure. Shall I keep talking?
You can, yep. Just-
Always.
Well, in the other public hearing agenda items are both related to historic districts. One is a new district that is being nominated, and the other is the downtown historic district boundary expansion. So, all kinds of exciting things to talk about this evening.
Can you all see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Yep.
So this 367 State Street, this came before the commission for a workshop at the beginning of February. And the comments from the commission were shared with the property owners who are on the call this evening. They are requesting approval to remove the vinyl non-compliant windows that they installed without a certificate of appropriateness and permit, with appropriate wood sash 1/1 sash windows. And they're also seeking approval to replace 3 existing 1/1 wood sash windows on the 3rd floor. They provided additional information on the 3rd floor windows. And based on that documentation, it does look that they are non-original track wood replacement windows. Earl Steenberg and Bill Godlewski are both on this evening for any questions or to present any additional information that the commission may need.
Erin, I have a question. When I was looking at the slide you had up and reading the packet, it sounds like, I just want clarification. I get the certificate of appropriateness for replacing the 3rd floor with wood, but it looks like they're seeking a retroactive certificate of appropriateness for replacing the 2nd floor windows with a vinyl. And I didn't see that they are looking to then replace the vinyl with wood. It says replacement of 3 historic windows with vinyl sash windows, but then the second sentence is only for the 3rd floor.
I will so I did clarify that may have been a carryover from the last meeting, the first sentence, the retroactive. It will have to be a retroactive certificate of appropriateness for the replacement, no matter what, because the historic wood windows were removed without approval, so they are going to have to seek retroactive approval for replacement done without a permit or a certificate of appropriateness. But they are proposing to remove the vinyl sash windows that were installed and use an appropriate window, the appropriate wood window that was in the packet.
And remind me, I know we talked about this in the last meeting, but if we deny the retroactive certificate of appropriateness for the vinyl windows, do we then in this meeting also consider that they will then replace those vinyl with wood, and then we could approve or deny that second?
Yeah, so if you look at the staff recommendation, and I can go through that. I talked to
sorry,
Martha.
I don't have
No,
my packet with me,
it's
sorry.
okay. I talked to Martha about this, just to make sure that we were doing that, the whatever motion the commission decides to go forward with this evening, what staff is recommending is denial of the installation of the vinyl sash windows based on the rehabilitation guidelines for retention of repair and retention of historic material, or replacement with a compatible material. So either replacing a deteriorated wood sash window with either a replicated wood window or a aluminum clad wood window. So denial of the installation of the vinyl, and then approval with conditions of the wood sash windows on the second floor with new wood sash windows that match in profile, fill the entire opening, and are installed in the same plane as the historic windows. And then also approval of the replacement of the non-original wood sash windows with new wood sash windows with the condition that the same conditions as the second floor, that they fill the opening, match the profile, and are installed in the same plane.
Okay,
So
thank you. Yes.
That's the staff's recommendation.
Okay, thank you for reminding me of that.
Yep, not a problem.
Well, I certainly, appreciate the applicant's understanding of the ordinance and the desires that the commission expressed at our workshop, and the offer to replace the vinyl windows or install wood windows where the vinyl windows have ostensibly temporarily closed the opening, but are not going to be a permanent feature of the building.
So do any of you have any questions for either Earl or Bill? Or
I have a question, just for our own betterment as a commission. Did you not know that this was a requirement, or how did this come about? A lot of stress on you, I'm sure, as well.
I'm Bill. We didn't know. We've never replaced any windows. I've had the building for roughly 20 years now and never had to do this before, but the condition of the second and third floor were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And we had our contractor in doing some work on the second floor, and the tenant was complaining about him, and he contacted us and we said, yeah, go ahead, replace the windows, and then found out that, there were requirements involved. So, that's why we said, we're willing to pull them out and put in the right stuff. We just got to know what they are.
Yeah.
And we went to the recommendations, and we did get an estimate. It's going to be about 20 weeks to get those custom made. And about $3,500, and we're willing to do that. We just need the approval to move ahead on it. And the third floor is actually probably in worse shape.
Yep.
The draft coming through there, and the tenant, fairly long-term tenant, all of them, is not happy with us about it. We've been explaining to them that we're trying to address this, but you know, we want to do it right. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
What kind of, no, that's okay. Thank you.
Erin,
Yes.
Glenn, did you say these third floor windows are replacement windows?
Yes, so you can actually tell, sorry, let me see if we can do a little zoom. It's a little bit difficult, but those are not,
In the jam.
I believe it's a track system.
I see that. I see that now. It's just not new hardware.
those are the
In the
windows that
profile.
were in when I purchased the building in 2004.
Right.
Yeah, it looks like a spiral spring counterweight type of mechanism.
I think so.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
it was a common replacement technique that was used, you know, probably 30, 40 years ago.
I'm just wondering if if they replaced this, if they filled in the weight and used the spring, but the sash, it doesn't. So you'll replace the third floor with similar windows that match the openings and.
Yeah, I believe there were, on the recommendation list, there were Pella and Anderson, or there are some recommended ones. We got price quotes on it for the second floor so far. It's about $3,500. That's fine, but they did say it's about 20 weeks to get these custom made, and we haven't gone on it because there was some issue, like if we order these windows and bring them in and spend all this money, are they going to pass approval on your end? You know, the city wrote off on them. It seemed like they were good, but I'm like, we can't order in windows, wait half a year and spend, you know, $3,500 to find out that they're not acceptable.
No, that's certainly understood, and the information in the packet identifies the windows that
Mm-hmm.
you know were
Yeah.
part of that, you know, group of recommended windows. So you know, as long as they meet the size criteria and fully fill the opening as described in the conditions that Aaron, Glennon provided,
Yep.
then there shouldn't be any issue with the approval
Okay,
of them or the acceptability of them.
great. Yeah, we you know, we didn't know, so we went ahead, and once we found out, we're not trying to butt heads with anyone about this. We just wanted to, you know, figure out exactly what we need to do and, you know, go ahead and do it.
No, that certainly is understood. And again, we appreciate the fact that we're not having to fight this, that
Oh, no.
you know, you're willing to you know, undertake the replacement
Oh, yeah, no problem.
with the proper windows. So Aaron, it sounds like this is a two-step process. First, we do the denial of the retroactive certificate of appropriateness that accepts the vinyl windows, and then we do an approval of the proposal to replace the windows in kind with new wood windows that meet all of the stipulations as established.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Do we have any other comments before we take these two actions?
So we did, there were two public comment letters in your packet.
Yes.
One in opposition to the installation of the vinyl windows, one in support of the installation of the vinyl windows. And then we also received comments from the Washington Park Neighborhood Association this afternoon that was in support of requiring the applicant to remove the vinyl windows and installed an appropriate wood replacement window.
Good.
Okay. And is there anyone that has signed up to make a comment this evening?
No, we only received written comment.
Okay. Well, then I'll entertain a motion on the first item, the denial.
I'll make a motion to deny the retroactive certificate of appropriateness for the vinyl windows.
Okay, that motion is made by Aaron Tobin.
Can-
Is there a second?
Second,
And a second by Commissioner Kaplan. Without further ado, I'll call it to a vote. Okay. So we're gonna have to, I'm gonna have to do a roll.
I'm gonna stop share so that we can maybe see each other a little bit better.
That helps.
Okay.
I parked the little images off to the side and I couldn't retrieve it. Okay, then in the matter of this denial, Commissioner McEnany? Okay, Commissioner Tobin? Commissioner Kaplan? And Commissioner Hacker? And, okay. So that motion is carried unanimously. And now the matter of the second motion for the approval with the conditions stipulated for the installation of wood windows in the bay and also at the third story. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve the installation of the new wood windows as specified in the packet on the second and third story. I don't know if this would be part of the motion, but I strongly, if there's any deviation, I want to make sure they talk to Aaron Glennon because this is where things get squirrely.
There will be no deviation.
Okay.
Okay,
My only request is it's going to take 20 weeks to get the windows. So if you're going to give me a permit, please make it open long enough that we have enough time to buy them and install. Once I get the windows here, we can pop them in a couple days. But as I said, I'm going to order them now. It's going to take me a full 20 weeks. That's what they're quoting, and then we'll install them. And it'll be this all started because we painted the place, but I won't get into that. And the windows
Yeah.
the wood was rotted, and then it just stonewalled.
well, you did a nice job on the painting, so
Yeah.
we like
It looks
that.
great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And Earl, the certificate of appropriateness is good for a year.
Awesome.
Cool.
And the permit will also be I think it's 6 months or a year, but you will have, if you need
Renew
to renew it, we can do that. But once the certificate's in place and there's proof, proof that you've ordered whatnot, then we can proceed. So
Fantastic. Thank you for everybody's time. I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
we
you.
have a motion. Do we have a second for that motion?
I'd second it.
Okay, thank you. And then all those in favor of the motion, as I call, just say aye. Commissioner Hacker,
Aye.
Commissioner Tobin,
Aye.
Commissioner Kaplan,
I,
and Commissioner McEnany.
Aye.
And I vote affirmative as well. So that motion is also carried unanimously. So go forth and order your windows. And
Thank you.
we have to start talking to places like Home Depot and different contractors and make them aware of the fact that these conditions are definitely in place in historic districts.
Yeah, well, we know now, so.
Yeah.
Moving forward. Thank you.
Anything you do to the outside of the building, just
Yeah.
talk to Aaron Aaron Kaplan, or excuse me.
Just
It's been a long day. Aaron Glennon, and she will guide you skillfully in the right direction.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda, if we can proceed,
Yeah.
is the nomination of the Steamboat Square Historic District, or nomination of Steamboat Square as a historic district, and to receive that designation. And this is there was a lengthy history recounted in the package that we received, which tells much of the story that we've all lived in Albany if we've been around long enough. So I know Jack and I have been, so we've seen this unfold over the years. So is there someone present, Aaron, to
So,
kind of guide us
yep.
through this?
Derek King is here from Preservation Studios out of Buffalo. He'll be presenting tonight. Derek, you should have ability to share your screen when you're ready. And Tim O'Brien is also here from Albany Housing Authority as well. So.
All right. Thanks, Aaron. Hi, folks. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. As Aaron said, I am from Preservation Studios. We are a historic preservation consulting firm based in Buffalo, but we've worked all over the state, including having completed about 100 historic tax credit projects in the city of Albany. This is our first National Register nomination, though, and I think that's a testimony to Albany's extensive historic districting, which is very impressive. But yeah, so I thank you for having me. We were hired by the Albany Housing Authority to list the Steamboat Square complex of towers and townhomes on the National Register, and are assisting them with their tax credit application for the tower at 20 Rensselaer. Just to quickly run through the basics, the Steamboat Square Historic District is a collection of 49 functionally related buildings located in the South End neighborhood in the city of Albany. The complex consists of 3 apartment towers built between 1959 and 1961, a fourth built in 1965, and 44 townhomes built in 1983, as well as a non-contributing garage that was built in the early 1980s as well. All 49 buildings were erected by the Albany Housing Authority as public housing during the second half of the 20th century, and they are locally significant under criterion A in the area of community planning and development. As the first public housing tower project in Albany, the buildings embody local and national themes of urban demographic change, neighborhood decline, and urban renewal, the development and funding of public housing, segregation, tenant organization, collective bargaining, and changing conceptions of the design and role of public housing. The complex is also significant under criteria exception G in social history related to civil rights for its association with the history of social justice and housing in Albany in the years between 1963 and 1983. Persistent organized pressure by residents and the larger community took 2 decades to effect necessary physical changes to the complex, but these efforts resulted in a successful 1983 rehabilitation that completely reconceived the interior spatial divisions of the towers to provide flexible living arrangements for different categories of tenants, eliminated features that provided opportunities for crime, and rescaled the exterior elevations and landscaping to set off more discrete areas for families. The project was showcased in the Architectural Record magazine in 1984 and became a model for rehabilitating existing public housing stock around the country. The period of significance begins in 1959 with the construction of the earliest building and ends in 1983 with the completion of the townhouses and rehabilitation of the towers. And just real quick, this is the proposed National Register Historic District boundary, which only includes functionally related buildings and will not include any non-functionally related properties in the adjacent streets. From here, I will take a quick break because I did prepare an additional maybe 10 to 12 minutes. As was noted, it is a pretty lengthy National Register nomination. I've tried to distill that down. But I don't want to necessarily take up too much of everyone's evening. So if we could, I can go through the presentation as prepared, or kind of go through the slides, talk generally, and we can go directly to a Q&A. As noted, this is my first time presenting here for you folks for this National Register process.
Well, speaking for myself, I think, going through the slides and giving us the anecdotal presentation, and then we can certainly respond with any questions or observations from the members of the commission.
Okay. Yeah, and I did try to distill it down into some of the core elements that go through the National Register narrative. So we'll try to go through quickly so we can get to that. All right, so starting just with some background of the neighborhood prior to the development of the towers, the historic mapping suggests the neighborhood was a mixture of housing industrial lots and vacant lots. The future site of the Thatcher homes, indicated here in a red boundary, was characterized by storage buildings, some tenements, smaller mixed use housing, and as you got closer to the river, it became increasingly industrial. We have some historic photos of the time that show kind of the characteristic of the residential properties. But regardless of what owners and residents of the neighborhood thought about their community, the city was displeased with the conditions. And throughout the 1950s, the city looked at ways to transform the South End neighborhood through urban renewal programs, from creating a new civic center or even a new city hall. And it wasn't until funding through the U.S. Housing Act of 1954 became available that any large scale projects were kind of really put underway. And specifically, the John Boyd Thatcher II homes were proposed in 1957. The proposed project consisted of 400 units spread across 4 12-story reinforced concrete towers. The high-rise design was a departure from the Albany Housing Authority's previous public housing, but the AHA determined that because the project would be located on high value land near the waterfront, it would be more cost effective to build up instead of outward. The proposed towers in the park style, derived from European models, was the most popular typology for public housing projects nationwide at the time. Units were concentrated vertically to provide for large green spaces around each building, where tenants would have ample room for recreation, and housing towers were more economical, could be constructed quickly, and provided more units on a smaller footprint than traditional low-density forms. The 12-story buildings featured 2 elevators, one accessing the odd floors and the other accessing even floors. And instead of trash pickup, chutes on each floor led to incinerators in the basement, and there were coin laundry facilities on the ground floors. Unfortunately, there were immediate issues without easy access to open spaces on the upper floors. Children played in stairwells, hallways, and elevators, resulting in regular and expensive maintenance from overuse and vandalism. Grassy lawns at the base of the buildings allowed children the space to play, but were made impractical due to the lack of restroom facilities on the first floor, which resulted in reports of human waste left in halls and elevators. The issues around housing families in towers were anticipated by community members as early as 1956, when the Federation of Churches wrote letters to the AHA and the Federal Public Housing Authority, strongly objecting to the proposed building style and the site, which was adjacent to an industrial area with busy rail lines and car traffic. The AHA experienced high turnover in the buildings, which led to deterioration of interior conditions from vandalism and overuse. Residents regularly dealt with smashed light bulbs and bashed and marked walls in the hallways. A tenant reported that hardly a day goes by that someone doesn't turn on the fire hose and flood the stairwells. Serious criminal activity escalated beyond vandalism, and the buildings were labeled the Towers of Fear in a 1963 newspaper article. A majority of these incidents were perpetrated by people who did not live in the buildings, but were drawn to the area from the bars on Green and South Pearl Streets to the west, or from the railroads to the east. Intoxicated men and teens would park on the roads surrounding the complex or wander into lobbies and harass women and any girls walking alone. And as a result, tenants feared leaving the building after dark, and some claimed it was unsafe to sit on benches outside even during the day. The AHA had contracted with the security company, and while tenants did not complain about the quality of the security, many felt that the number of guards was clearly insufficient to address the safety of almost 1,500 people across 4 buildings, 3/4 of whom were women and children. For example, no security was provided during the day, and only 1 or 2 guards were on duty at night. Motivated by the Civil Rights Movement and the Fair Housing Act, the Thatcher Homes Tenant Association was formed in 1968 and brought grievances to the AHA director within 4 weeks of forming. Little changed, however, until the Thatcher Homes Tenant Association joined with other AHA public housing complexes, the Lincoln Park Homes and Wayland Homes, to form the Albany Tenant Association Council in 1971, allowing larger numbers of tenants to unify and make more serious demands from multiple complexes. The council provided the AHA with a list of basic demands, including a tenant-based security force instead of absentee or ineffective private security companies, a tenant member on the AHA governing board, and essential repairs to the buildings, such as leaky roofs and broken elevators. In 1972, without any meaningful resolution, Thatcher Homes joined a rent strike begun by the nearby Wayland Homes the previous year, and successfully petitioned HUD to block millions of dollars in federal grant money the AHA had applied for until their grievances were addressed. Rent strikes were one of the most commonly utilized tools in the fight for adequate and safe public housing, and had been employed by New York City tenants since the early 1960s. During a single rent strike in the winter of 1963 and 1964, for example, 100,000 New York City tenants participated. Originally, these strikes were organized to protest rent increases. However, by the 1970s, tenant associations began to rely on rent strikes to demand improved living conditions. So facing continued decline in conditions and considered intolerable by both residents and the surrounding community, the AHA began work on a major overhaul of the property in 1981 in an effort to comply with changing community development standards. The campus was entirely redesigned with the needs of the tenants in mind. Most of the longstanding problems were believed to stem from the unsuitability of tower living for families. As AHA board tenant member Ernestine White stated around 1980, we needed family developments that promote privacy and a sense of identity, not large families in high rises. As part of the redesign, 4 of the towers were completely gutted, and the floor plates were altered to create fewer units with more square footage. Blind corners in the halls were removed to improve safety, and children were only allowed to live in units that did not require use of elevators or halls. And I have an example here kind of showing the historic floor plate, which had a mix of 3 2 single unit or single room units on each floor, and you can see how dense it was when it was designed. And this is actually a historic floor plate for 20 Rensselaer, and then the redesign in 1983, which dramatically reduced the number of units and decommissioned a portion, which we'll talk about in a little bit, just to give you an idea of the kind of shift in how these units were laid out. Other design elements at 200 and 220 Green Street, new child-friendly 2-story units in the towers were accessed by individual exterior entrances on the 2nd floor with recessed open-air patios carved from the exterior walls. The 4th through 12th floors contain 1-bedroom and studio apartments reserved only for elderly and childless tenants. Additional open-air corridors and balconies for individual apartments were created at 230 Green Street by removing sections of the walls to soften the original design. In all 4 buildings, the units facing the freeway, especially on the upper floors, were abandoned and the windows boarded instead of replaced to comply with, and I think actually, so going back you can see the decommissioned area. This is the area facing the highway, which also was the result of, or it caused the closure of the fourth original tower from 1961, which was decommissioned prior to the redesign because of the elevated highway being constructed, and it was deemed unsuitable for housing. So just going back, to comply with updated fire codes and modernize the aesthetics of the building, exterior fire stairs on the north elevations were covered in decorative precast tile and attached to the building with an exposed steel structure. The townhouse units, arranged in attached rows that fronted on the sidewalks, were designed to resemble the historic housing stock and draw the focus of the entire street outwards to the interplay of the neighborhood and pedestrian activity and minimize undefinable space to the project site. To remove the stigma of the much maligned Thatcher homes, the towers and townhouses were collectively renamed Steamboat Square as an homage to the 19th century steamboat docks just northwest of the site. Once Steamboat Square was complete, it was showcased in Architectural Record in 1984, publicizing its modernization, both aesthetically and socially. The redesign of the complex drew the immediate interest of other municipalities in the Hudson Valley, as well as in neighboring states, and several cities engaged the architects who designed the redesign immediately afterward to address their own dysfunctional public housing, including Schenectady, Poughkeepsie, and Newark, New Jersey. In summary, the Steamboat Square Historic District illustrates a national story about the optimism of mid-century public housing, the unintended negative impacts their initial designs wrought on residents in the surrounding community, and the potential these buildings still have to act as community anchors. In the decades after their construction and the issues that followed, the work by tenants on the local and state level was instrumental in forcing leadership changes that resulted in more support by the AHA on behalf of the residents and the buildings to create safe and suitable homes for families at the complex. Without the efforts like rent strikes, tenant associations, tenant security, and ultimately tenant board members, Steamboat Square would not have been realized, and Thatcher homes would likely have been demolished like many other public housing complexes in Albany and surrounding municipalities. The 1980s townhomes and tower alterations document the successful attempt to create a cohesive complex with more traditional forms that blend historic public housing into the existing neighborhood fabric instead of standing apart from it. The townhomes especially are the culmination of tenants demanding what was their right by law, and only with these buildings can the effectiveness of the housing rights movement on Thatcher homes be fully understood. Together, towers and townhouses represent a significant and distinguishable district associated with the evolution of the public housing movement in Albany between 1959 and 1983. So thank you, folks. I'll go back to the first image.
You can see the threatening highway on its way into the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Which really was, I guess the culmination of a lot of the issues with the housing beyond the social issues of inappropriate living quarters. The sound of the highway made the tower, the wings of the towers that were adjacent to the roadway uninhabitable.
Yeah.
And that's where large amounts of floor plates had to be decommissioned because of that.
Yeah,
So,
and I think only in a couple of the towers are portions of that northern or the highway facing portions. There's a couple that are commercial units, but a majority of the floors on that wing are decommissioned in all the buildings.
Yeah, usually the upper floors were decommissioned just because of the noise generated by the road.
I have a couple of questions. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was great, Derek. For a completely different reason, I've been spending 2 days reading all those housing acts from 1949 forward. So I'm with you. That was really, the timing could not have been greater. Thank you. 2 questions. One is, what's the impetus for this?
Yeah, I actually, Tim, are you still here?
I am, yes.
Do you want to take that question? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So Good evening. My name is Tim O'Byrne. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the Albany Housing Authority. And I just
Okay.
really, I want to thank Derek for that great presentation. I think it showcased really the history, not only of this project, but really some of the struggles of public housing over the decades of not only just in Albany, but across the country. Some of the issues that were associated with people trying to solve issues and address issues, and how we are as a community trying to correct some of those mistakes that were made in the past. The impetus of this project really has been it's been a long-term goal of the Albany Housing Authority to continually redevelop and reimagine our developments and our properties. The Steamboat redevelopment plan is really, I think it's almost 3 to 4 years old at this point. We've been working on this project with our development partners of Edgemere Development, again, for 3 or 4 years, with a desire to renovate and redevelop the entire campus, which would include the first phase, which is 20 Rensselaer Street, which is the northernmost building. There's 3 remaining towers, which we anticipate will be part of future phases of construction and development for the project. And those would also include the redevelopment and improvements for the townhouse buildings that Derek highlighted. Forgive me, I'm not sure if that completely answered your question for the impetus.
I think what you're telling me is that possibly that it's the low-income the tax credits and the historic tax credits, and you have a private developer partner who's going to be working with you and taking advantage of those credits for the rehabilitation costs. Is that what you're saying?
I would say, yeah, that we definitely have the low-income housing tax credits were part of the application. The historic district concept was imagined by Edgemere Development, and it was something that we fully supported. As Derek highlighted, there was a lot of meaningful and important elements to this project and this property over the course of history, and it's relevant to us maintaining and redeveloping the property.
And that the smaller buildings are less than 50 years. What's the 50 years of age? Any responses yet back from the SHPO or from National Register folks in DC about that? Any?
Yeah, we actually have already submitted a Part 1 application to get a preliminary determination for listing the district, and it's been approved. We did have some back and forth with them about strengthening that criterion G argument, and it's incorporated in the draft here. So, so that criterion G,
the part ones of the tax credit application.
Yeah, it included a draft of the National Register nomination, and the SHPO and National Park Service advised us to push for this criterion G, which is specifically for properties that have gained significance in the last 50 years. And so that's really where that component and really highlighting the kind of tenant efforts. And real quick, I also want to point out that the Albany Housing Authority was very instrumental in this as well. The 10-minute overview is impossible to distill everything, but that collaborative effort at the end of the 70s and into the 80s between the AHA and the tenants is a really big part of why this is significant.
I just want to say I thought you did a great job in providing that context. It was a very interesting National Register nomination to read in the packet, and I thought that I appreciate that the period of significance went to 1983, and so I'm glad to hear that the Part 1 has been improved and that there is a collaborative effort on that, and that SHPO and the Park Service sort of saw that broader context, looking beyond purely aesthetics of it being a beautiful building or worrying about what was there before this complex was built. So I think this is a great project, and one that I think will be a model for other housing authorities. I think housing authorities around the state are starting to look at National Register significance of their mid-century and later mid-century developments. So I'm really happy to see this.
So one more question, just a footnote. So that the period of significance goes into the 1980s, is the assumption then that as the architectural planning of the project proceeds, and therefore the part two, that also will offer protection to the 1980s rehab features?
Yeah, and I think it is an interesting question because this is a new area for the tax credit program to get into that era. But we actually do have an approved Part 2 application for 20 Rensselaer. So if building off of that scope for the other towers, which were extensively renovated in the 80s, and as mentioned, almost all of the floor plates were modified pretty extensively with different materials and treatments in the units. And I think for the townhouses, keeping that feeling and keeping some of the layouts, kind of treating them similar to other residential properties, it's just a different era and different types of materials now. So, but yeah, I think having the approved Part 2 on the first tower, it will give a good template going forward for the rest of the buildings.
It's really fabulous. It's a very, very interesting step. So kudos for the presentation, and Derek, what you put together, and Tim for your work on it. Really great.
I'm very close to this because of what I used to do back in the throughout every year of the 70s and early years of the 80s. And what's missing is the name of Joe Layden, who was the best housing director that we had in the nation, who had a real faith. He started as the first social worker for the Albany Housing Authority. He was hired there in 1967. And the Green Street projects, as most people called them, were considered a disaster. And it was incompatible with the neighborhood that it demolished at a time when the city would have loved to have had the garden style apartments of Watervliet or Menands or not Menands, but Watervliet, Cohoes, and Mechanicville. And the cities were told by HUD, not by anybody locally, if you need housing and you want housing, you're going to take high rise or you're not going to have anything. So to me, the Thatcher homes were built as a disaster, an error, waiting to fall apart by piling families without supervision, with a system that I remember speaking to the time they hired a social worker, there was not one family with an able-bodied, usually a man, anywhere. It was all single parents, because once you had a breadwinner who was earning enough money, they would get out because the taxes would go too high. And so you wound up with all single parent poverty families. It was a disaster. It really strikes me odd to immortalize it as a best example of historic preservation. Socially, I understand. There's a history lesson that's important. Architecturally, I've got real mixed emotions whether it should have ever been built, and especially in that spot. Joe Layden was tremendous in that he had faith in public housing at every level. And he was the one that brought in the row houses to make it part of a neighborhood. I see this as somebody coming forward, not because of a sense of history, but saying this tax credit makes a lot of sense to bring this up to date and to do something very positive. Historic tax credits, I don't know. If you were doing to treat this as a mini district, why isn't Giffen in there? Giffen served all the kids that lived in those houses or the adjoining houses, old or the newer improvements. Why isn't Giffen in there? Are we talking about a neighborhood? How could you not include Giffen? It looks more like something that's aimed at an owner, who in this case is the Albany Housing Authority, who has done a wonderful job dealing with what had been a disastrous circumstance, and it has survived and even prospered by comparison. But wouldn't you include the schools where the kids go to right across the street, built in that same period? I think Giffen's built in the early 60s. It was, it just, if you don't have the same, normally when we take a district as opposed to a building, is we take a boundaries of a building that has, or of a neighborhood that has some cohesiveness. Surely Giffen belongs in that category and brings us all the way up to South Pearl Street.
There's two things there, Jack, if you don't mind. And I do want to just quickly point out, and again, my distillation, I probably could have done another 15 minutes, but we did try to highlight Joe Layden's involvement and in particular his advocacy for this housing complex. And we call out specifically in the National Register nomination that he was on the side of the tenants in fighting a prison that was proposed for the neighborhood, as well as the light industrial park that ultimately was built. But he was a constant advocate, so we did try to highlight his efforts in this. But to your other point, I think the distinction here is this is really about the functionally related buildings of the towers and the townhomes and how they were proposed as a kind of cohesive plan together. I think when we had approached this with the SHPO, that was really what was at the onset. And we had discussed whether this was a part of a larger kind of community historic district or a neighborhood historic district. And I think one of the things that becomes problematic is there are some vacant lots in the area. There are a lot of homes that were modified after 1983. So even with that extended period of significance, it does introduce a lot of properties around the periphery that, where do you stop the boundary? So as far as a defensible boundary goes, it really, the towers and the townhomes make sense from that perspective. And to your point, the school does have a strong history related to the properties and probably should be listed either individually or as part of a neighborhood context down the road, because one of the main complaints of tenants when this complex was constructed was the lack of educational facilities. And so when that lot across the street was cleared and the school was built, it was seen as a victory, even though the other conditions that folks were concerned about when they were built weren't remedied. But I think to your point, when you list a church complex, if it includes a school, you don't necessarily always list all of the surrounding neighborhood with it. So from the SHPO and National Park Service's perspective, limiting it to the functionally related properties that these were designed and constructed by the Albany Housing Authority, this is the resource. And going back to the criterion G argument, this really pushing that period of significance to 1983 was a big ask to begin with. And I think when I get to that point, I don't necessarily want to rock the boat too much by proposing a much larger boundary. And I think possibly in 10 years, 15 years, reevaluating that or reevaluating a larger neighborhood context would be more than appropriate. But for trying to get this property listed right now, this was the most expeditious.
I just want to add to support Jack's comment was, I think it was in 1955 that the funding from those housing acts or its amendments or on whatever they were in 55, I think it was when the funds were first available to use for other public facilities. So it's it's very logical. To me, Jack's comment of, wait a minute, but what about Giffen? It's all part of the whole story of public housing in this area. But I hear what you're saying as well, but it's not a separate, it's not separated from, and it's very likely that the funding source was very similar, very tied as of at least 55.
Also, if you did go to Giffen, which is every one of those kids went to that school, which is on the map. It's across the street. Well, not really. It's because of the new row houses. You realize you've also got other public buildings in the public bath and in the former firehouse that are, both of them are stable and decent shape. And you've got St. Anne's Church and its rectory. And, you know, normally when I think of a district, I think of, in this case, like, is St. Anne's Church now in the South End Groesbeckville district or something? My guess is it's nowhere.
It
No,
is.
I think
It is.
that it is. It is.
It's
It
with the bathhouse, St. Anne's, those are all within South End Historic
Okay,
District.
so they move, so they're covered.
Yes.
All right, so the only question is really why Giffen isn't there, because it's surely the same architecture and period of construction and the same clientele in the names of the kids.
What I'm hearing is that maybe there could be down the road, separate from this, it's sort of like the individual versus the district, although in this case it's one district and perhaps another one, but you know, perhaps there's room here for the South End Historic District, which is a very old one, to sort of grow and include more of this mid to late 20th century history. As I'm kind of reflecting on the neighborhood, it seems like that might be an area that could grow and include and wrap in Giffen and
Yeah,
that story.
It would seem to me another way to start discussions around it could be an expansion of this district related to some of the housing programs at the time. I'm worried about touching the South End district boundaries because there's so much
Me
loss,
too.
as we all would
Yeah.
be. Yeah, because anyway,
Yeah.
different
I'm just saying-
discussions.
Yeah, but I think we need to vote on this specific, what's our action on this specific proposal that's before us tonight? What do we need to do?
So, for the last couple National Register nominations we've seen, because we're the certified local government, the Historic Resource Commission is required to either support the nomination, and that information will be forwarded on to both the mayor and the New York State Review Board, or find that the nomination does not meet the review criteria, and a reasoning for why the HRC doesn't feel that it meets those criteria. But there needs to be some sort of vote in either support or opposition to the nomination this evening.
I think it surely is, should never be added to the pastures district. They have totally different character, different period. And as long as the complex around 4th Avenue, which is St. Anne's and the firehouse and the public bath, if they're already covered and they're far more the character of the section to the west, even though it crosses Pearl, it has an identity in its own right. The late mid-century, and certainly there's a social message of urban renewal, one that was redeemed by some enlightenment after they started as a disaster. It's a separate, I can see it's separate identification of Steamboat Square. I think we should revisit the relatively modern construction, particularly for Giffen, maybe at a later date, but I would not block this in its own right, having the opportunity of recognition, because it is a very important lesson, not just for Albany, New York, but for public housing across the nation, that other than the demolition of high rises, which took place everywhere, that there was a way to maintain them. These were built with interest rates of 1%. So they were very economical, and it made sense to, I remember the conversations with Joe Layden, who founded the Tenants Association with the Marbleys and other people who were tenants and so on. There's an important lesson there. I wouldn't block it, but it makes me uncomfortable with things that I felt never should have been built. I had a hard time with the brutalism of the parking garage across from the Dutch church. But, it's a different state in its own right, I guess. But
So Jack, a question for you,
but
just
I'm
for fun.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
What did the mayor think?
The mayor, well, there's two things. Mayor Corning
Yes, of course.
was take it or leave it. If you want housing, you're getting high rise, period. And so the choice was you had to turn down the new housing while the old housing was rotting before your eyes. I remember the approval of the pastures for renovation, but it took years before the cash ever got here. Things were very top down at that time. Everything was done in Washington. They told you what was appropriate, and you had no input on anything. And it was take it or leave it. And there was actually, it didn't happen until they got into a whole different way of saying, this is your money, we're going to give it back to you, and you decide how to do it, instead of it's our money. If you want our money, you play our game. So
That's probably the block grants, right? 74 or so. Yeah.
Yep. Then things changed. Then you decided, hey, here's the money generically. We're going to call it housing, or call it labor. We're going to call it, then you're going to decide what's appropriate. But up until then, no. And ironically, that happened under Nixon, who could have cared less about manufacturing, local policy in cities, etc. It's your money, you take it, you describe. Whereas Johnson felt he had grown up with the WPA, and everything was done by Washington, and all wisdom came from Washington. His first job was what we would have called the neighborhood youth corps director for West Texas. And Washington told him everything. And so he ran everything that way. And you were told, take it or leave it. And there was a tremendous amount of micromanaging, but it needed another word other than micro, because it was macro managing of the nation, which really left a lot of communities in things that they just couldn't relate to it. You would have never locally, when you see what's done in Watervliet and in Cohoes and up in Mechanicville, you would never have wanted that. You would have wanted that in your community. This is what people liked. They thought it was perfect, but if it's not high rise, we're not going to do it. Take it or leave it. But I have a lot of problems with it. And demolition was extremely expensive. It was also with a visionary like Joe Layden, whose first job there was as their first social worker. He really believed in the people, and he believed in public housing. And he actually turned things around. His successor was the same way. And they managed to save a lot of these places. It would have been a lot easier just to demolish everything, but where would you put all the people?
Thanks. Nice perspective.
You know,
Did
and
we-
following up on this with the, you know, the really important lesson is the social history and the activism that, you know, came into play to affect significant change, where they were blowing these high rises up all over the country. And they did manage to find a way to make these transform them into something more livable and more acceptable by the, you know, the resident population. I think there's so much interesting about the story that it needs to be kind of captured and told, so that adds the level of understanding why this is being considered as a historic district. And I don't know what plans might be in place to, you know, give the dimension of the historic nature of the story and the evolution of this and the personalities that were involved. This is activism 101 that, you know, came into play here. But I agree with Jack's sentiment. This never should have been built. It wasn't right for Albany to begin with. But it is what it is at this point, and it has survived with the activism of people of vision that saw a way to transform it.
Particularly the Tenants Association was excellent.
Yeah.
George
They-
Marble.
They should be applauded and
Yep.
remembered for this, you know, this transformation that took place that would not have happened without them. Well, we have an obligation here this evening. And we certainly appreciate the presentation and the depth of research and perspective that has been wrapped around this proposal. But the consideration before us this evening is whether the Historic Resources Commission of the City of Albany wants to make a recommendation, yay or nay, on the consideration of the Steamboat Square, or the designation of Steamboat Square as a historic district.
Eric, could I add something from a historic note? The original survey for these was done by my father in the early 1950s. And it had the number NY4, which I think was the fourth project approved in New York State under that particular program.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Hirschberg has touched everything in the city of Albany, Dan.
Oh my God, yes.
My father was an assistant city engineer from 1928 till 1940, and then went on his own and he became a surveyor, and he loved surveying, and he turned over the engineering to me when I came to work with him.
That's great. Thank you.
So I would consider a motion to, you know, from the commission.
So moved. Oh, no, you didn't make the motion. Sorry.
I'm not allowed to.
That's right. I move that we provide a positive recommendation for this National Register nomination.
Second that.
Thank you. Any additional comment, or anyone from the assembled public out there?
Let me check. We didn't have anybody signed up to speak. And I don't see anyone in attendance with their hand raised, so no public comment.
Okay. then I would call the motion to a vote. Please signify by saying aye when I call your name. Commissioner McEnany,
Aye.
Commissioner Kaplan,
Aye.
Commissioner Tobin,
Aye.
and Commissioner Hacker.
Aye.
And I vote affirmative, so the motion is carried. We look forward to the next steps, and maybe in 10 years, we'll consider the adoption of Giffen as part of the Steamboat Square complex. But, thank you for all of the effort that went into this. It certainly is. It's good to get that whole history kind of laid out and understand it. I remember when I was a junior in college, one of our projects in the architectural studio was the South End neighborhood development, and it was the towers and what to do with them because they were such a disaster. And that was in 1968 that they had just become a very, very difficult place for people to live, and how was one to deal with it architecturally? It didn't come to pass until the 80s, but it was dealt with.
I just one quick note. We don't usually tell our story. We do our work, and that's what we do. But it's an interesting story, and if you're not in the historic preservation at large business and you didn't understand National Register in 50 years and social history and all of that, it's easy to imagine that it would be hard to grasp what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so much a part of the racial history of the city and what happened to the city that I hope there's a way that we can encourage or participate in making this public. That some information about why and what is put out through the whatever resource that might be, HAF or other, or a talk or the TU or whatever that might be. Because otherwise it's really easy for someone to have no idea what it is we're talking about with those towers. You what?
Yeah, I mean,
I
why
think,
would one
I
consider that a historic district? And, what were they thinking? But I think there is a much larger story, and it's it is.
Derek, I think Derek, the way you summarize and you put this this presentation and history together, I think it would be a great way to, somehow we need to document that in some kind of I'm not sure whether it's some memorabilia or something in the buildings that kind of really recreate some of the history that you've kind of highlighted here. So I think we should talk about that as part of the redevelopment of the first building, but also the entire project.
Actually, is Kara on the phone?
No, she's not here tonight.
Okay, well, let somebody remember to talk to Kara about this, and then the parking garage of the Cap Rep and that. There's others. Yeah. I didn't mean for you to, Erin. It was kind of a collective, let us remember.
I'm just making a note because I'll forget as soon as we end the meeting tonight.
Well, they did Bridging the Divide in Troy, so
right.
Call up WMHT and do something about Steamboat Square.
Mm-hmm.
Great idea.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, everybody, for your support of the project, and we appreciate your support for the district.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. All right.
All right, Erin, we now have the downtown Albany Historic District boundary expansion.
Yes. So give me let's see. Let me see if I can pull it up. again.
And this is filling in some of the holes and telling the, looking at the buildings that were nearly 50 years into the establishment of the district
Yes.
initially, that we're looking at filling in holes and adding buildings that have now reached that ripe old age.
Yes. So this is another application that is going to the State Review Board on March 10th for consideration. The New York State Historic Preservation Office is proposing to, I would say, amend the boundaries of the existing downtown Albany Historic District, which our downtown Albany Historic District represents kind of the core of the city of Albany's history, over 300 years of history, and our commercial development within the city of Albany. So the expansion is kind of like a three-pronged step. They're proposing to amend the boundaries at the, the northern corner to capture the Park Mart garage, which we just discussed, and Michael Lopez had presented to you all last year, which is individually listed. And then also to include this southwestern corner of the district to capture the modern building on the corner of State and Eagle, and then the row of 19th century row houses that were excluded from the original designation. The Park Mart garage was originally excluded because it did not meet the period of significance, being constructed in the 1970s. And then this orange portion on the southern boundary the boundary line is being reduced because this is the Times Union Center, and the original structures that were included in the 1970 report that led to the later nomination have since been demolished to make way for the Times Union Center construction. So with the expansion of the boundaries, the State Preservation Office has also updated the period of significance for the downtown Albany Historic District. Originally, the period of significance was from 1815 to, I believe, 1930. It's now since been updated from 1850 to 1973. They've qualified, they're stating that the expansion meets criteria A, C, and G, which is G is for properties that are less than 50 years old. That's for the Park Mart structure, as well as other more modern structures within the existing boundaries. The other part of this amendment is to update the classification of structures. So 17 buildings have been reclassified from non-contributing structures to contributing structures. Most of those changes are due to buildings now being 50 years or older. So at the time of the nomination, they did not qualify or weren't considered significant. They've also updated the structure list to also reflect changes and modifications to existing buildings within the downtown district. So like the Steamboat Square, the Historic Resource Commission will need to either make a recommendation in support of the expansion or against the expansion, being a certified local government. And then those, our recommendation will be forwarded onto the mayor and then onto the State Review Board for the March 10th hearing. So I don't know if anybody has comments or questions.
Aaron, just a clarification.
Yes.
With the designation of the Park Mart on, or inclusion of it on the National Register, but not within a local district, it was still not under our purview if any alterations were to be made to that building. Is that correct?
Correct. So,
But by expanding the district, it now does fall within our purview because it's in a locally designated district.
so we would have, the Historic Resource Commission would have to adopt the amended boundaries as well in order for it to fall under the local jurisdiction. These amendments are only to the National Register boundaries. We would then have to go through and also amend the local district boundaries in order to do that, to oversee or have jurisdiction over those structures.
Okay, and that would have to be a separate action.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Well, the floor is open for comment. That, I think, was the substance of the presentation.
I think if I look on it the right way, since it's not the local designation, this is a question of including these areas that are within the historic district as being eligible and or being designated on the National Register, which makes them eligible for tax credits. And if they're eligible for tax credits, we would certainly feel confident that encouraging this type of activity will enrich the overall district, even though a particular building might not be one would stand out as something that we can't wait to get their historic designation, but they hit the basic quality, 50 years. And if improvements are encouraged, it encourages the economic health of the entire district. Is that about right?
Well, it does that, yes. But it's also going through and recognizing that the downtown Albany district isn't just made up of late 19th century, early 20th century commercial structures, that there is actually a very wide variety of commercial buildings outside of either the 1920s or 30s that were left out because when the original proposal went through, they didn't feel that it fit within kind of that late turn of the century period of significance, when there are some very good examples of mid 20th century structures within the downtown district. So it's part of this is, you know, updating the original nomination to reflect those buildings in that period of the city's development.
Oh, what an interesting meeting. Yeah.
Are there any comments or observations? And it certainly seems like an appropriate step, and you're updating the, you know, the listing of buildings within the boundary and making slight adjustments to the boundary.
Mhm.
Happy to see that old Trailways building being listed. It's got a lot of potential. Is there any argument against accepting it or moving it forward onto the National Registry or expanding the boundaries? Is there a reason not to?
Question.
I can't think of one.
Well, that's a very good question, Chris. I think the answer's like John said, these are not just like we just spoke to. These are not the most obvious buildings meriting protection. A lot of them are kind of chasing tax credits, right? The potential for tax credits. That's not a bad thing. It feels kind of early in their histories for some of them to be appreciated. I'm just thinking out loud here because you asked such a good question.
Yeah.
They are the story of the city of Albany, right?
Mhm. There it is.
Yeah. It's not that the designation of any of these buildings has maybe more to the point. It's not like the designation has really adverse impacts because they could be demolished, right? And replaced, and there would be a whole process engaged for different reasons. Some of them, I mean, look at that Rite Aid, you know, all that terracotta and all the potential there. So it's a good question, though. Interesting question. I don't think there's any reason not to. Except we better tell Kara that we'll include this discussion as well as part of the public's, our public, wanting to, the public education component of what we do.
If you're looking for a reason not to be comfortable with this, if you take something like the former Grants building, which is just a huge blank wall. We just did a mural adjoining it, which, by the way, worked out very well. You worry by taking that, you can see it's a mid-century and it's a horizontal and blank wall element in what should have been something with a vertical element to it. If you put it on the National Register, does that mean that somebody is eligible, but will have to be very careful not to change that wonderful front on it, which is already an intrusion? And if they had an enlightened way that they could put something that would be more compatible with the neighborhood, would they be discouraged from doing anything with tax credits because they're not preserving what's already there?
Yes.
That's the one reason why you might think twice. You may look at that building and look at the context that it's in. To me, the context is sometimes more important than an element building in its own right. Do you really want to lock in that front, so that no one will ever want to change it very much, because you could lose your tax credits by making it look appropriate. So that's one reason you may want to think twice. Some of these, I'm surprised that the Rite Aid, looking at the picture here, isn't already eligible. And there are a number with vertical elements that are, just barely under that. Really, they tell a good story, etc. But then there are others that are intrusions, and we like to see some of them get some help, because that helps the whole district. But if you were to take this grants building, because you gave it a blank check for everything that was geographically there but 50 years old, did you really want to lock it in? Or would you want to get somebody more creative to redesign it? Not enough to tear it down and start all over, which they can do, but forget tax credits.
I just wanted to add in here that I think that that's a really good point, but I also think that's, it's hard for us to sit here and speculate on that. And I'm always reminded of the fact that in the 1960s and 70s, Victorian brownstones were frowned upon. In Philadelphia, Ed Bacon tore down all the Frank Furness banks because they were unsightly and out of context with Independence Mall. So I think it's kind of hard for us to know, down the road, that might not be seen as an intrusion as it is to somebody for whom it's such recent memory, us sitting here. So I think that's a tough, I feel like if the State Preservation Office is saying that this is part of a contributing part of the historic district, and they have and I thought they made that case in the boundary adjustment paperwork, that's what we're considering here. And, work that's done, I think that the Park Service tends to look at things. If it's a tax credit project in the near future, they might give it a little more flexibility than they would otherwise. But I don't know that that's really for us to say here as part of this consideration.
Mhm.
It's very interesting comment, all of these, but on one hand, the NR staff at the state office this is what they do, and with the Park Service, and in theory give lots of thought and consideration to conversations like this. And yet, on the other hand, we're the ones thinking about our city. So both am respectful of what they've provided us, and hear the other comments. So Jack, back to the question of what would one be restricted? And maybe Aaron, you want to speak to us on that. So let's say you take the grant building, and no tax credits, but you want to change the facade. What's the kind of procedure? And no federal funds, no state funds, so the state's not involved, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the building is already located in the downtown Albany district. So this structure falls under local designation. So it would have to meet our local historic resource overlay review criteria and go through the process of receiving a certificate of appropriateness for any exterior modifications. And the one thing that we would be looking at is, if somebody were coming and looking to completely reface this building to make it look more like a turn of the century, late 19th century commercial structure, the criteria says recommend or you know, has a pretty strong, under the rehabilitation criteria, states, you know, you shouldn't be creating a false sense of history, that structures, you know, in their own right, have their own significance. And so we would be recognizing this structure as a mid-century building and encouraging anybody that was coming forward with a proposal to be respectful of the style and the building. Now, it doesn't say that someone couldn't do something to it, but you know, it shouldn't be creating something that, you know, isn't reflecting this mid-century structure.
So you're saying no state or federal funds, our review doesn't change?
Correct.
Okay.
You know, the central warehouse, which is the ultimate obscene examples of poured concrete. If we put it on the National Register, would they be allowed to cut windows in it to turn it into housing on the upper floors?
So
That's what usually happens with some of these industrial buildings. They become residential and then
Right.
they start to need windows.
So if that structure is on the state and national register and they're only using private funds, there's no, you know, tax credits involved, or credits from homes and community renewals. They don't have a review process. They would have to meet the local regulations. So there would be some criteria they would have to meet under the city zoning code for design standards, but there's nothing
But if they were going after tax credits,
But if they were going after
Yeah.
tax credits, they would then go through a review process with the state office. And then also that would be forwarded on, if they were using federal funds, to the National Park System for their review and approval. But the National Register nomination, if people are using private funds, does not prohibit them from making changes to the exterior or interior of their structure.
Jack,
Okay.
I would expect that that project would, if it proceeds as is now, it seems to be its trajectory, that it would be proposed for housing,
Yep.
that there will be negotiation with the State Preservation Office at a, you know, pretty sophisticated, pretty engaged discussion about the character of the building and the character defining features of the building and the most significant elevations and where changes might be acceptable. And the goal, I think, would be kind of from the state, from the Park Service and from the developer to make it work. But it's not, that will be tricky. That will
Yeah.
be tough, but
Yeah.
lots of those projects are. In fact, the Huck Finn warehouse was kind of easy because of all those monitors, right? They had a
Yeah.
lot of light.
Yeah.
But the intent is, the goal will be that it works, but it'll be a very interesting and careful negotiation and set of discussions. But that's different than here, right? That's different than here.
Mhm.
So given that, I think we've just clarified that our support of the district modifications, expansion and other modifications, would not change our review of a building such as we see here. I'd recommend that we support the district boundary, as it's called here, expansion.
I take that as a motion.
Yes, yes,
Thank you, Marilyn.
I'll
yes,
second
sorry.
that motion.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to accept the recommendation of the expansion and definition of the downtown Albany Historic District. So if we have no one in the public that wants to make a comment, I'll entertain a vote on this matter. So all those in favor, again, I'll poll Commissioner McEnany,
Aye.
Commissioner Hacker,
Aye.
Commissioner Kaplan,
Aye.
Commissioner Tobin,
He might be.
You had to go to her
Muted?
phone.
Aye. Sorry, I couldn't
Oh.
find my unmute.
Okay, that happens. All right, I vote in the affirmative, so it is carried, and go forth and change the, adjust the boundary, and we'll be on the lookout for projects that come before us.
Perfect. I will let Shippo know. So thank you.
And we are now up to the public workshop portion, and it's consideration of 236 Clinton Avenue and changes being proposed to the elevation of the building from that which we reviewed previously and issued the certificate of appropriateness for the design.
So I will turn it over to Lisa Rodriguez from TAP. But this did receive a certificate of appropriateness in August of 2020. The project is going for HCR funding, and the planning department did issue a extension for approval for both the certificate of appropriateness and the planning board decision. So that would extend the approvals for the previous project out until 2022. Lisa did reach out to me that they were looking to revise the application. So I will turn it over to her to run through this.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. We were here before, and as I started detailing the older design and realized I had to custom make foam brackets for the design, that didn't sit well with me. I couldn't find 5-foot tall foam brackets. And I wanted to take a shot at modernizing the design. The whole thing had kind of gotten away from me. It started with one big, large building, and then you asked for it to be divided up, and I kept changing it incrementally and never got a chance to go back and start from scratch. So I decided, let me take a moment and go back and see if I can make this a more modern building that still responds to all of your concerns. I asked Subi Architecture to help me with this. The image you see on the screen is from her office. It turns out it shows up a little squatter than it actually is, and I have I think it's been stretched a little bit. I have another version where I remembered after I sent this to you that you wanted some of the horizontalness taken out of an earlier scheme. So I had worked on that a little bit, and that's when I realized that it was drawn a little bit squat. So I corrected that in my later drawing. I do want to apologize. I included the wrong materials list in with this resubmission. And I've since sent Erin the actual materials list that goes with this design. And if you let me screen share, I will show you the materials list and how this particular design has evolved.
Give me 1 second, Lisa.
Okay. Oh, and I just want to let you know, this is Barbara Nelson, our director here at TAP with me.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Barb.
Really interesting meeting. That was, no, really fascinating.
Yeah.
The whole, Housing Authority thing was really.
Yeah, and I'm on the THA board, so, you know, we're talking about things like, can Griswold Heights be a historic complex of buildings, things like that. So it's very interesting.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, yeah, how do I do that?
Got to the more.
That's why she's here.
Share screen. Let me pick the one. Not that one.
Okay. Oh, I can do it this way.
Yep. And you
So,
also want the, oh, one and then the other, and then hit share. Yeah.
so how do I know what they're seeing?
Just move that. Yeah, click and hold.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
new to
there you
this.
go.
Barb does it all the time. I'm new to it. So we still have brick on the facade. We've introduced a polymer product, a tongue and groove siding product. So we're mixing it up to have all brick on the bottom and then alternating the red brick and the sort of mushroom colored brick. And then above the mushroom colored brick, a tongue and groove siding product. And then where the bays are, the same product there, a darker color for that. We're proposing some cast stone lintels and sills, aluminum panels between some of the windows, and aluminum clad windows in bronze. These other products are for the back of the building. But I think you're more interested in the front of the building. Now, how do I change to?
So first, if there's any questions about the actual materials, and then we'll go to the corrected facade.
Yeah. Any questions about these materials? I do apologize again that you didn't have this in your packet. They are referenced on the sheet, though.
Lisa, can you go, what will you be using for kind of the capstone cornice feature? Will that also be cast stone, or will that be?
No, I envision that as projecting perhaps a foot and being covered in aluminum to match the other aluminum on the project.
Even on the brick portion?
Yes, yeah. Just very plain, clean, simple line. But projecting a foot, so it gives it that cap feeling.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. No, the red stuff, Jim.
Oh, okay, I'm gonna switch pages now. Oh, wait, I want the note. Do I want this latest one? Yeah, yeah. Sure. Okay, so we took that design that you see in your packet, and I remembered that you wanted less of a horizontal line there. So I took away the horizontals that were preventing the brick from reading and coming down to grade. So the brick came down to grade, but our horizontal line was breaking it up.
Actually, yes. Quick maximize.
Like that? Yep. And they don't see it then.
That's right. Then move them on the
Okay, so we retained the divisions. There might even be one more division here. They're slightly different than they were before, but almost identical to what we had before in terms of the divisions across the building, breaking it up into vertical sections. We retained the bay windows. We retained most of the doors going into each section of the building. There's one section where we didn't need a door and we were putting one, and it would just be confusing to have the door there because it doesn't go to some place that you're supposed to access from the exterior. But there's lots of doors. No, we're interested to see what you think. We think, we like the idea of a more modern facade than trying to old up, something and that isn't old and it's fake, and we'd rather do something authentic that's modern, but still has that rhythm that you're looking for with the verticals and dividing it up. So we're very interested in your opinion. I shouldn't be doing this to this project at this stage of the game. We're very near getting our funding from ACR. We've been awarded the funding, and the closing is imminent. It's in June, I think.
We could just really tell that as architects, Lisa was struggling with, creating a building that didn't look like what it really was, didn't portray the truth of the structure. It is one structure, it is one program. And, our historic architecture, when we mimic it, we're not using all the materials and the construction technology that was used, in the building that you see, right to the west there. So, it just felt truer, felt more honest to really give it a contemporary flavor, but honor and respect, the rhythm, the scale, the geometry of St. Nav as we know it, but to actually let it be a building of today.
Well, it has preserved kind of the modulation of the different masses. When we first looked at this, I think the big objection was that it looked like one gigantic monolithic building and
Sure.
didn't reflect the rhythm of the property lines. But I guess the clapboard, the horizontal lap siding as a building element just seems to be antithetical to the masonry nature of the neighborhood. And I can see that material certainly on a bay or some projecting element, but to have it be basically every other structure almost looks like it's a wood framed element, just doesn't seem to be consistent. I know it has the brick base, but with the brick base being the same color as the siding above, it kind of takes away from that the masonry aspect of the previous design and the nature of the neighborhood.
I think the neighborhood is a mixture. This little building to the east is a frame building with the brick paper on it. And if I recall correctly, there are buildings across the street that are frame. And the brand new building, about a block and a half down the street, is hardy board siding, it looks like. And I think you allowed that because there is a substantial number of frame buildings in the neighborhood.
Would you like us to pull up a street view?
Actually, Lisa, can I take control back? Because I have the photos that you have in the presentation
Okay.
that you provided. So I can pull that up.
Okay.
Yep. Second.
Taking panoramic photos.
So I think 4, which is the top photo, is directly across the street.
Yes.
5 is the site.
Yeah, so it seemed like there were a substantial number of frame buildings in the neighborhood and that it wouldn't be inappropriate to have a frame element
Mhm.
in the facade.
Okay, I'll have to cruise that section of the street again.
But we hear your comment that the clapboard siding is something you're questioning. If the clapboard is not an issue on the backside, can we?
No,
No.
no, not on a, a non-principal elevation.
Okay.
I guess we got comfortable with a brick building.
Yeah.
and It's,
Yeah, you've got it's a tough
Yeah, what
design.
am I looking at
Probably.
now? The lower one is the one that we approved, and now they're rejecting it to put the plainer one that looks more modern above, right?
Yes, the
Yeah.
bottom elevation is what was approved in August of 2020.
Right, and all of the soffits have been thinned and made straight, and they all match. Every one of them matches. There's no difference on every one of them. And there's no sense of bay windows. It's quite boxy.
But
It's,
they are big.
They project a little bit.
I
CR wouldn't let us fiddle with the areas of the unit.
when I take a look on the left-hand side at those windows, there's 2 triple windows, one above the other. That was kind of nice, and it jutted out a little bit. That's
I
cool.
did change that. So may I share the screen again?
Are you looking to show an elevation that you provided in your submission?
No.
No, it's the evolution of this design. So I really want to, hear your opinion and find out what's working for you and what's not working for you. So I wanted to be able to show you an evolution of that design so that I could really get some, come away with a good sense of where I need to go with this.
You should be able to share your screen.
Okay, so here I kept that, I brought that bay back in. I remembered some of the things after we submitted that. I remembered some of the things that you liked about the other design. I brought that bay back into it. I broke up this horizontal. It was pretty continuous. And I remember that you didn't want it to be so continuous. So we have some of the masonry coming down without being broken by a horizontal element. We've got canopies over the doors, the main entry doors that pop out. They're on columns so that they could be long and come right to the stair edge. And there's a little canopy over this door, and this forms a canopy over this door, and then smaller canopies here over these storefronts. So these are actually little storefronts for rent through the ACES business incubator.
Does every every soffit have to be exactly the same?
No,
Before there was variety, and now there's very little variety. The 3 short ones match one another, and then the 4 tall ones match each other, and it tells me an institution was created.
mm-hmm.
either public housing authority or something else, and it doesn't go with the neighborhood where you had individual personalities in architecture, one after the other, each somewhat different from. I'm not as comfortable with it compared to what the original was.
Okay. Is it the simple nature of those four, let's say the four tall ones that are all similar?
It looks to me like something that's institutional. I don't know what it is, but it's all the same, and it's an institution, whoever put it there. And I didn't have that feeling with the original. I felt there were individuals with character.
That's exactly what we're grappling with as architects. It is one building, and we could raise the height on 2 out of 4. We could make the bands deeper. Again, we can certainly play with it. But
I always feel when somebody says it's more honest. The first time I ever heard that was somebody who couldn't afford to put a drop ceiling, so all the pipes were up there. And I said, you got to look at that. It's more honest. Well, it's this is certainly honest.
yeah,
It is what it is. It's one big unit that has a minimal amount of variety in it.
it's true.
It's a really tough problem. My heart is with you. I almost wish that you gave us some fabulously modern detail, but new approach. And this is the 2020s, but then we probably, would have had a different conversation. But yeah.
No, you're right.
It's interesting having just had that conversation, of course, about public housing. And we're back in, a different version, but all the restrictions that you guys are working under of public supported, publicly funded or supported housing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
Be honest, is there a major difference in cost going from the first one that we looked at the last time and the one that's there now?
No. There might be,
So minimal cost consideration, it's more
yeah,
design consideration
yeah.
on your part, yeah.
But one of the things I heard, sorry that I have to be off camera, my phone battery is very low. But one of the things I heard, Lisa, is that, this creation that kind of stuck with me is these foam brackets that, in terms of materials, I guess a question is, do you think that you're going to have better longevity with the materials and in this design? Or, I would hate, it might, the original, which I also liked, looks great, but are we going to have that same problem where, the brackets last for 10 years or 5 years or so I feel like that should be a consideration too.
Yeah, I do feel like, that's a questionable material, and that these are all durable materials, which of course you want on public housing. Working on another public housing project in Troy right now, not me, but as a board member of THA, and they're proposing EPIS for a bunch of the facade, and I'm beside myself thinking that's not really the kind of product we want on public housing, where we want things to last for 30 years, 50 years.
Yeah, it's also a matter of design intent, and the brackets that we see on all these Victorian buildings, they're structural. They were there to support that overhanging cornice, and to apply these foam brackets just for decoration. Again, we're going to work what makes you most comfortable and what's going to be most acceptable in the district. But again, it seemed to me very dishonest to to apply these brackets where they're not necessary. We could, of course, come up with a much more contemporary material, something that perhaps replicated the shape and rhythm of a bracket. Do something with the brick as we get up to that height there, or something with a couple different planes in that cap up there.
Yeah, I think a modern interpretation is certainly acceptable and probably preferred in a new building to kind of evoke that feel, but not necessarily apply a lot of ornamentation to
Right.
early it up, so to speak. So the idea of creating a fascia beneath the projected cornice with a raised brick panel or something,
Yeah, that's
maybe
what I was wondering, if we did
Yeah.
something with the brick.
And
I think there are lots of ways to achieve that without making it look falsely historical.
I have a question. I think we've seen 3 different versions, and now we're staring at your middle version, right? This is.
I
Do you
think
want
this
us?
this is the third version, I believe.
The third version has those kind of those bays. I thought that the one we saw didn't.
one that was sent in a couple weeks ago did not.
It had 3 bays, the one we sent in 3 weeks ago, where in the beginning.
And
And this one has 4, and the middle one, I think, had 3.
Okay, so this is the current proposal.
Yeah.
Okay,
This is the one that matches what's in our package.
yes.
Yeah.
But, okay, I lost track because we had a
Yeah.
different
This-
There
version.
was another
yeah,
one
this-
floating
yeah.
around there.
This one I don't believe was in the packet that was sent out.
Right, this is
This was not submitted to the city.
right, we just finished this one, because we were working on more on just working the details of the construction with the materials, how they would work. So the brick line raised a little bit, canopies moved a little bit. Just it evolves as you do your design development for how it actually gets built.
Can we see the earlier version of this, and which is kind of stripped down to function, I think, and this one on the screen at the same time? Can
Share.
Okay, hold on.
We'll have to combine them on one screen and then.
Yeah,
Okay, so how do I do?
Yeah.
and while you're doing that, I think I missed, what's the, what was the concluding comment, if there was a concluding comment on the siding? What was just discussed as to what would be or wouldn't be?
Zoom in that one for the same. We're getting there.
That's great, thank you.
I really appreciate your patience and your guidance.
In the background. Or else leave it that way because it was drawn too long. Yeah. Okay. No, can you just make the bottom? Yeah. Good. Okay,
Now,
now to share.
Or toggle between them or whatever. works.
Oh, yeah.
it's not set up to do it that way.
No, me- Lisa, better you than me. That's all.
Voila.
Ah, nicely done. Great.
So you
Great.
can see the one that was submitted to you was actually out of scale. It was longer.
Yes.
A
than it-
little bit, yeah.
It was flattened out a bit. And it was just a mistake in the,
Dropping it into the Photoshop program to render it.
So the more vertical
Yes, the bottom
is the
more
bottom. Okay.
accurate.
All right.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah,
that's
it does
good.
look a little squashed in the package.
Yeah.
and on the left end, you'll see the difference in the two buildings to the left. In the one on top, which is the wrong one, you see the long horizontal
Mm-hmm.
canopy. That's been eliminated, so there's no that, there isn't that white cast stone element tying them all together either. But I do appreciate the openness to a more modern interpretation of brackets and cornices. And if the clapboard was replaced with brick, is that something that would be?
Yeah, are you feeling like you want to see brick, an entire brick facade? It's not actually clapboard, it's a tongue and groove material.
My own opinion, but I'm just have one person's opinion here, is that as we kind of move to a more contemporary, a discussion of more contemporary character, that it's even possible for me to imagine that what is shown there as that tongue and groove, whatever the material is, and now you're asking about brick, is that maybe it's even a more contemporary material. Maybe it's a steel panel. I mean,
Right.
again,
A larger scale panel,
Yeah.
like some that we've seen on other projects.
Yeah.
or we're seeing corrugate, corrugate. Yeah, it's a possibility.
Okay.
And then I guess the last piece, it's really helpful to see these side by side, is my eyes are drawn to the cornice or top, but that probably belies, that's because we're looking at an elevation drawing. But that's all we have right now. I wonder if, especially on the red brick portions, where you've got a bit of expanse of brick above those third floor windows, right? Or especially on two of them or something, maybe even if it's not brackets, but some other variation in the treatment of the brick or the height of the material there or something.
You can do that.
Well, let's check others. That was just,
Yeah.
I don't want to send you on a goose
But
chase.
it seems a common theme that there should be some variation up there from what we have.
But it seems too
Right
thin,
now.
as you speak of it, they do seem like foreheads, kind of awkward faces up there, so.
Kind of it goes along with modern construction to have that big area up there, because there's a 2-foot deep truss, there's insulation, and there's a 30-inch parapet, so there's a lot of space.
There's a lot of space, yeah.
up there. It's a common problem in modern construction.
And you don't
Yes.
really get to recess anything up there because it's just a veneer.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so if there's any variation in that area, it's a change of brick or a change of something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The storefronts seem okay to you? The ground floor level?
It does to me.
It does to me.
Yeah, I think it works. I mean, at one point it was almost continuous glass, and that was kind of disconnecting it from the. So, you know, each building element is framed or frames the glass. So I think it works. I think the windows in the bay at the far right end and bay number 2 at the second one in from the left end just look awfully small.
Mhm. Yeah, what you're reading is that those are bedroom windows and the larger windows are living room windows.
Yeah.
And we're also not seeing lighting here that can add, that would add a lot of interest to the storefronts. You know, whether it's sconces or light under the canopies.
Should we talk about signage? So right now, I don't know what the buildings will be, what the different entrances will be called, but what I have shown are backlit metal, freestanding metal letters. Is that something that you approve, the signage? Or, should we talk about that?
Well,
I
that would be
think it
part
will-
of the overall package
Yeah.
that we'd have to review.
Okay, so I just want to bring it up in case you have an
Yeah.
objection to that style of sign.
Actually, it's
Is
a
it
nice
just-
opportunity.
Sorry, Mary. No, go ahead, Marilyn. Go ahead.
Well, it's just a nice opportunity at eye level at the places of point of entry into the buildings to set a more modern tone.
Mhm.
So I think that works with the direction that you're going.
Okay.
I have
And
no
there-
problem with it.
And I was just gonna add, they're just aluminum cut like channel letters. They're not like a plastic internally illuminated channel letter.
Correct.
Okay. So would they be like a halo lit or would they be like lighting that's mounted that backlights everything or?
I think it's backlit.
Okay.
I can get you more information next time.
Yeah, when you
Yeah, that'd be nice to see.
develop the packet that would need to be submitted for the hearing.
Now, the one we're looking at is the lower one, right? That's the latest version,
Yeah, correct.
right? Because the other one was the one that was on top was so squat.
Mhm.
Well, and I remembered after I submitted that, Subi helped me with that one, that you had asked in previous meeting with the other design that you wanted,
Verticality.
yes. So I was trying to get the verticality back, by breaking up the
Yeah.
horizontal line.
You know, who are the people that are going to wind up living in these areas up above? Who are the clients going to be? that are gonna be
So
in
it's
these?
what you call workforce housing, it's affordable
Yeah.
housing.
To me, knowing that's who's going in there, these are people who are low income that I want to see them blended in with everybody on that block. So that nobody says, oh, that's the one in the ultra modern one. And that's the one you can tell them right away because they don't match. These are people that I don't want them to stand out like a public institution does. I want them to blend as much and to be an integral part of that neighborhood and walk the streets and go up to the corner store and go into a building that's not that radically different from the other buildings. And that's my concern with the element to make it look different so that everybody knows this is different. Do we really want those people to be different too? And are they a part of society that is going to value being different? And I don't see, I liked it the way it was before this came up, and it blended very much with the neighborhood, which is what I wanted for the people.
I totally understand what you're saying because I feel exactly the same way. I looked at some other projects, even in Albany, I looked at some other projects that are affordable housing, maybe housing authority properties, and I say that's stigmatizing. That's making them other. I didn't feel that with this. I just felt like it was a modern design. I didn't feel like it stood out. You know, the colors are pretty subdued.
You have
And
enough.
anybody in a new building would expect this type of detailing, I think, not something that's older.
Yeah.
So to me, this wasn't stigmatizing. I've seen designs, even in Albany, that I think are stigmatizing because somebody was experimenting on them. I didn't feel that this was that.
What is the process going forward if we have this workshop here, we take back your concerns and ideas, and we work with it, and we resubmit another evolution? What is the approval process going forward? Do we wait another month for another workshop? Do we?
So if you would like to come back for another concept review, we can definitely schedule another workshop. The next meeting of the Historic Resource Commission is on March 17th. And then the following meeting, we've revised our review schedule. So the March meeting would be on the 17th. And there would be a meeting on April 7th and April 28th. But we can definitely schedule, I mean, if you revise it, you could come back for another workshop. Generally, what ends up happening when applications are placed on an agenda for a workshop, the next meeting would be a hearing where the HRC would take action. But if you don't feel ready for that, we could always workshop it again. But going forward, while we are on Zoom, all the application materials up to the most current iteration would need to be submitted in advance of the meeting. We generally don't do the back and forth with the screen sharing, so that information would need to be submitted at least 10 days prior to the meeting, so that material can go out to the commission in advance, at least the week prior.
Thank you. We appreciate you allowing us to share like this. It was important to have the right scale.
Does that schedule cause any problems in terms of other scheduling that you've got or submissions?
It would be helpful if I had the bones of it approved now so that the estimating and some of the detailing can continue.
Lisa, we unfortunately can't do that because it's only been noticed as a workshop. We can't take action on this as a commission until it's been officially noticed as a hearing. We had gone over this back in 2020 as well. We can't give like a conceptual approval or anything like that. Yep.
No, our best case would be that you all looked at this and said, hey, you're in the right mode. We're feeling good about this, go on to the hearing, make some adjustments and come to the hearing. So yeah, we understand. We just wanted a more positive vibe, but we're not, well, we've only heard from a couple of you if you want to chime in, but pretty sure that if we were asking for actual.
Lisa, do we really want to go through another workshop and wait till April or get it approved, or should we ask for a hearing and a potential approval on the 17th if we can get the drawings to the level that the commission is comfortable?
I think so. That was going to be my question: is what's the downside of making our next presentation a hearing, if you're still not satisfied with it, it gets tabled perhaps?
Yes. Yep, it could get deferred and pushed out till April.
Being that you have some comments, Lisa, to try to work with, I know there's a divergence of feeling about whether or not this should be pursued at all, or should we go back to the older plan, but taking that into consideration, if you think you can make accommodations that might need approval, I think we ought to submit to get on a public hearing for the March 17th. And if the commission can still not agree with it, we could ask to defer it till the April 7th meeting.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to do that. I think I have good feedback from the board and that I can improve things and satisfy your comments. And we'd like to move forward and go for it at the next meeting.
All right, well, that certainly sounds like a plan. Is it possible to send the rectified image to Erin, that she can share it with the
Yeah, she's
commissioners?
already got it.
Oh, okay, you do have it. All right.
I'll resend just in case, but I'm pretty sure she has it.
Actually, can I get a read on the color tones here as well? The very, very original scheme that was sent to you, or the one that was not the very original one, but the
the earlier one.
the one you're gravitating toward with the much wider variety. There were much brighter colors in that as well. Not only was it different architecturally, but it was different in its color palette. Do you have a reaction there?
In the one that had been approved previously?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Compared to this. So how do these colors strike you?
We pull up the original that was approved? Someone?
Yeah, the original in the
You have it,
the
or do you?
building on the left was,
Yep.
Erin has it, I think. So-
Yeah, I've got it. Hold on. Let me figure this out.
there was more of a buff colored
Yeah,
building
what?
involved in that. There we go.
yeah. It's kind of interesting you bring up the question of color, because even though the one on the top is not the one we're talking about, but it is kind of the same colors that that the current proposal is. But I think you're on to something, because those photos that flash by us of the existing neighborhood doesn't really have that kind of grays, and it doesn't seem that that's prevalent, the grays and the browns, and nor the modern tones that we're talking about. So maybe the color, as you kind of process through all this one more time, maybe the colors can take some other clues, as I think the lower one does, from some of the variation or the colors in the neighborhood. We
It
Yeah, I
changed
would
the
agree.
rhythm so much, but I think doing away with that buff color on the first and third iteration on the bottom changed significantly the view of the building.
See how renderings impact you too, I mean, with the blue windows and the white windows. It's so tricky to get to know exactly the
yeah.
presentation style.
But from my perspective, yeah, when you take a look at the neighborhood and kind of the variation of colors that you see, not that these should be 8 different colors, but maybe we're not paying enough attention to those large areas of color, which is really as much as what you see as some of the other detailing. So
It's also
Good question.
almost military that this is going to be color A, the next one's color B, the next one's color
Yeah.
A again,
Yeah.
the next one's color B again, and then, whereas when you come down to the one that we approved, which by the way, I still love, you go back to the one that we approved, we hit them heavy with the buff color, we don't do it again. And we've got more variety in there and individuality on it. Whereas up above, it's almost a military step, left, right, left, right, left, right. Again, institutional.
Yep.
Okay.
Good question. Thank you, Lisa.
Great. Well, I really do appreciate your time. I really did look at this as a workshop where we could have this back and forth discussion. So I do appreciate your feedback. And this is a really big project for TAP, and we want to get it right and have it be something we're proud of. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Well, thank you. And, we look forward to the next iteration.
Okay, we'll see you next month. Bye.
Okay.
Right,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Aaron, do we have any new business items?
No.
We have any reports from the building department?
Oh, I do need to send those out. I apologize. It's been kind of crazy. I will send those out, and I still need to schedule a time for us to be able to discuss the next report that we have to
Okay.
produce.
When's it due, Erin? Oh, go on. You can say it.
April 1st,
Oh, okay.
along with everything else that's due
Yeah.
on April 1st.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I don't have anything, I don't have any updates for the commission. Oh, I do have and I will send out a follow-up email. I do have, one question. If any of you have attended any conferences or trainings in the last year, if you could send me that information, I need to keep that for my own records for when I have to provide my report to the preservation office. So if you could just send me an email, conferences or any trainings and continuing ed credits that you've received, that would be very helpful.
Erin,
Yes.
Erin, does that include if we have given a training? Like I gave a training to the city of Plattsburgh. Does that count as attending? Because I think
Sure.
for
Sure.
AIA credits that does. If you're a speaker, you can still get CE credits.
I
So-
don't see why not. They don't really specify like what it has to be. So, I mean,
Okay.
you were there, you were running it, and in reality, you attended it. So yeah, go ahead.
I did attend it.
You,
Thanks.
you had to be there. I think Martha does have something about party walls. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that you had requested.
Thank you, Erin. And so I have, this is, I guess I'm telling you the information that I have, but it's not in, and like, it's not in a memo format or anything. If you'd like to move it to something more formal, I can do that, but also just for giving you the information. So from what I found out, so what is a party wall and who owns a party wall under New York state law? So a party wall is a shared wall between structures. A common wall is a shared wall between structures that is structurally important to both structures. So there is a distinction between party walls and common walls. I think
Say that again, Martha. A party wall is.
Yeah.
Say that again?
So it's a shared wall between structures. And a common wall is a shared wall between structures that is structurally important to both of the structures. So I think I understood this 2 weeks ago. And now there have been so many different things.
So all
think-
common walls can be party walls, or all party walls can be common walls? Is that what you told me?
Well, the common wall
If
is a structural element that's important to both buildings, or
Right.
both occupancies on either side of the wall. A party wall is merely a division between two
Yeah.
wall or two units or two structure definitions. I'll have to look this up because I've never run into the term common wall, but
So
but
that's,
apparently it has some legal definition associated with it.
yes, and I'll visit that. And then for ownership of a party wall, it is determined on a case-by-case basis. The city doesn't get involved in ownership disputes between two private parties. And then the County of Albany is located in the 3rd Judicial District and the 3rd Judicial Department. And ownership of a party wall in the 3rd Department is a party wall is generally described as a wall erected between two adjoining pieces of property and used for the common advantage of both owners. I can send you the case law for this. Party walls are often located on the boundary line between parcels, in which case the portion of the wall on each property belongs to that parcel's owner, subject to an easement in the other building's owner for its support. A party wall, however, may also belong entirely to one of the adjoining owners, but be subject to an easement or right in the other to have it maintained as a dividing wall between two tenements.
So it could go either way,
Yes.
the party wall.
And then, yes. And then the question of whether engineers performing a demolition project in the city take into account the impact on adjacent properties when conducting a structural assessment of the project. The short answer is yes. For emergency demolitions, engineers take into account the impact on adjacent properties when conducting a structural of an emergency demolition project. Any damage done to neighboring properties is repaired by the contractor who is hired by the city.
So are you saying the bigger takeaway of the question of, is there any single definition of that wall? And you're saying that as a party wall, which seems to be the broader umbrella, because it may be structural, whatever that means, or maybe not structural, but it's the wall, it's a shared wall between the structures, but the shared isn't, that's a note, I wrote that down because you used the word shared. It doesn't necessarily speak to the ownership, the shared wall between structures, but the ownership is kind of, the city doesn't get involved. It's on a case-by-case basis, but it could be down the center of the wall, you said, or it could be on one side of the wall or the other. And in essence, there's an easement to the adjacent property, in essence, to use that wall for structure, I guess. So there's no single answer there, yeah? Okay. Okay. Thank you for looking.
It's as clear as mud.
Mhm.
I can send you these cases, but
No,
yeah,
that's okay. That's okay. I think you just said it depends.
That seems to be the driving force here. And so maybe we have to come up with our own definition, Marilyn,
Yeah.
or rules associated with them, because there are a lot of different permutations.
Yep. Thank you, Martha.
Yes,
Of
thank you.
Erin, thank you for letting me share that.
Not a problem. Thank you. Thanks for looking into it. So. All right.
All right, I'm hungry, so I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn if no one objects.
I'll move. I'm sorry,
those in-
I realize you see my my logo. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's not me.
It's fine.
Oh, all those in
Second.
favor, say good night.
Good night.
Aye.
Bye.
Good night, all.
You
Thank
all.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks,
See you all on
everyone.
St. Patrick's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're having a meeting on St. Patrick's Day. Oh, my goodness.
What are we serving? All right.
Corned beef and cabbage, green beer.
Perfect. All right.
All right.
Good